tenemos ahora espacio para algunas preguntas y quería partir con las preguntas al doctor Fuchs, que se incorporó, se logró superar los temas de conexión que tenía. Así que, Dr. Fuchs, if you could turn on your camera, please, and Hagen as well. Welcome back, Dr. Fuchs.
Welcome.
I'm gonna ask the questions in Spanish, and I understand there's translation, so you will hear them in English. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay. ¿Por qué una situación límite o una pérdida se experimenta como dolorosa? ¿Por qué el ajuste finalmente se traduce en una vivencia de dolor? Como que esa sería la manera que tenemos muchas veces de enfrentarnos a una situación límite, como la que plantea Jaspers. ¿Cómo es la operación mental y qué aprendizaje está haciendo una persona que se ajusta a esta situación límite por medio del dolor?
Yeah, thank you for this question. The limit situation is generally painful insofar as it shatters a way of life and a belief system that has so far provided security and familiarity. So a kind of shelter from the conflicts and contradictions of existence. So if this shelter, if this housing collapses in the limit situation, then this is experienced as a kind of disappointment. This is basically painful. We are suddenly exposed to existence with all its problems and conflicts and restrictions. We are exposed to existence as such. This can only be somehow painful, or at least a kind of stress, a kind of disappointment, so to speak. The learning process that is possible at this moment is a readjustment to, I would like to say, a wider concept of existence, a more tolerant concept of existence, which is able to take coincidence, to take fate, to take the uncontrollable into account. So to be more open, to be more enduring with regard to the unpredictability of existence. This would be a greater reliance on oneself, also an increase in trust in the future, despite the fact that we are less in control of it. So that would be the adjustment. Of course, this is combined with a questioning of the basic assumptions, a questioning of the housing that we all, and our patients in particular, built up in order to have our existential defense, so to speak. This should be questioned at least to a certain extent. I hope this is an answer that is satisfactory.
Thank you, Dr. Fuchs. We have another question for you. So you have spoken, perdón, voy a hablar en castellano. Usted ha hablado de la situación límite como una ruptura de la estabilidad en la que uno ha construido su housing, digamos, su Gehause. Y en ese sentido, esta pandemia ha puesto de manifiesto esta incertidumbre y nos da una oportunidad para aprender a convivir con esta incertidumbre. Sin embargo, uno de los participantes sostiene que la incertidumbre puede ser algo más bien excepcional en la cotidianeidad en países más desarrollados, pero no así en países de ingresos menores o de menos desarrollo, donde la incertidumbre es parte de la situación diaria. Entonces, ¿cómo se aplica la situación límite en países donde la incertidumbre es parte de del diario vivir? Thank you.
And this is a very good question. And I admit that this concept of limit situation applied to the pandemic rather fits to a very well, let's say to countries with a high level of interdependence, with a high level of planning and control, where all processes are meshed into each other in a very concentrated, very focused way. So for these countries which are highly interdependent in all their processes, the pandemic may become a limit situation as creating uncertainty. I admit that for many countries which are less developed regarding this interdependence, the structuring of all processes, for many countries, this uncertainty is part of everyday life. And perhaps we have to readjust or to reconsider whether the notion of limit situation really applies to such countries. I wouldn't deny that that may not be the case. I have to think about it. Of course, there remains the individual situation which may become a limit situation, but that applies to every unforeseen illness, for example, a severe blow of fate and so on. So for the individual in all countries, there might arise limit situations from such unforeseen events. But it may be that the concept is less applicable to certain countries which are less developed in that sense.
Well, perhaps the bar is set at a different point in those countries. For example, I don't know, if child mortality is very high in some countries,
yeah,
that's not an uncertainty for them when it would be really uncertain for us if suddenly there's a spike in child mortality, for example. So yes, perhaps the limit situation is different for every context. So there's not only one plain limit situation for everyone. Yeah. Everyone has their own limit situation.
Yes, that would be a good solution, I think. Yes, a good adaptation of the concept. Yes, I agree.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fuchs.
It's a pleasure.
So we have a question for Hagen now. So what have been the main uses of social robots in education and in assistance of people with special needs during social distancing? Has there been some unpredicted uses that have emerged that were not planned beforehand and were thus adapted to this special context we are living in?
So in education, the problem that arises, it's actually a very interesting situation. So the whole point of having a robot and the way we described it is to have an embodied agent. Otherwise, it would be sufficient to only have an agent on the screen, a virtual agent, which also exists. So to be in the same room with an embodied agent that is a social mediator with another human in a situation in which you would want to reduce social contact or need to reduce social contact in order to reduce the risk of infection, this is a bit of a contradiction. So to my knowledge, the use of robots in educational scenarios has not changed much. So basically, if anything, it has reduced a bit. So what we're doing right now, we have a mixed mode situation where we have half of the students in the classroom and half of the students being telepresent, which is quite interesting to see. And surely this gives the possibility to make comparative analysis of the presence of a robot, either physically in the room or being telepresent through video camera on the screen. But as we said, if you have the robot telepresent through the video camera on the screen, we would need to find out what is the difference to a virtual agent. Does it actually make a difference? And this is something that has not been researched. There's only research, okay, you have someone who is confronted with a physical robot and someone who uses a virtual agent. Both have advantages and disadvantages. But in a situation where you actually use a robot, a physical robot in a telepresence situation, this could be something new, interesting. And I'm sure people are doing research on this. We are trying to do too. But since the schools in Italy, which we were very badly hit in March and in April, all the universities and all the schools were shut down. So basically research and teaching came to a grinding halt, and we only started a couple of weeks ago. So the data there will be something that will be available after this semester, hopefully, given the situation is not deteriorating again. What is noticeable and was also mentioned by Luisa Damiano is that more robots have been used in healthcare, actually. Social robots have been used in hospitals, and the reluctance of the people accepting this kind of technology and not being afraid of a dehumanizing effect has decreased. Again, it is important to not have an unreflected perception on this, but also reflect on the negative effects that the technology can potentially have. But I think in this area, in using the robots in healthcare, in the hospitals, there have been actually the biggest changes right now in the use of social robots due to the situation.
Thank you very much, Hagen. Doctor Hoppe, yo tengo una pregunta pensando en sus narrativas.
Sí.
Lain Entralgo habla de, como usted decía, de que en el fondo los elementos del acto médico o los requisitos para el acto médico son la inmediatez y la continuidad. En medicina narrativa uno habla también de estar presente para el otro, que de alguna manera integra esos dos conceptos, pero haciendo una reflexión quizá un poco más profunda. ¿Piensa usted que este acto de presencia, de estar presente para el otro, son equiparables, telemedicina que medicina presencial?
Estoy plenamente de acuerdo que es un punto bien central. Yo diría que el elemento que en la descripción de Lain Entralgo falta es el concepto de privacidad. La privacidad, el hecho de que el encuentro ocurre fuera de lo público, no es accesible al mundo público, ocurre en un ambiente que es reservado y por lo tanto estrictamente privado, es fundamental. Y esa privacidad, por cierto, puede ocurrir exactamente igual a través de telemedicina. Y un poco es lo que yo traté de transmitir en mi primera narrativa, esto de que yo me sentí transportado a ese espacio. No sé dónde estaba ese espacio, pero era una salita y yo me sentí ahí. Y me quedó claro que estas dos mujeres solo podían tener esta conversación en ese lugar. Ellas no habrían ido a mi consulta a tener esta conversación, porque necesitaban la privacidad de su propio ambiente para tener esta conversación. De manera que yo diría que la privacidad es central, y esa privacidad sí la puede proveer la telemedicina.
Muchas gracias, doctor Jope. Yo creo que ya estamos justo con los tiempos, así que no me queda más que agradecer al doctor Jope, al doctor Lehmann y al doctor Fuchs por sus magníficas presentaciones, a la doctora Damiano a la distancia y de forma asincrónica también por su video. Gracias a todos los participantes y asistentes que han contribuido con su participación y sus preguntas. Y les dejo ahora con Macarena Barros para la cápsula humanista de esta mañana o esta tarde para los europeos. Que les vaya muy bien. Yo me despido por ahora y les dejo con Macarena. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your participation.
Chao.